Greetings and salutations, friends. This is Dustin Michelli here with you once again with Press Monkey Independent Media. I'm so glad to see you again. It's been a while since I've done a cast. Sorry, I don't mean to be so far behind, but I had a lot of things to do. A lot of things happened in the past year, which will explain my cast. It'll give you a preface of my upcoming cast right now. This is part 1 of 2 of a brand new series of casts that I'm going to try to start attempting to do, including maybe eventually migrating this podcast into a radio cast, which I hope that you might be interested in and hoping to look forward to. Really need to push myself out there. I know I've been really, really behind. Lots of things have happened, including the never-ending Russiagate saga, 2 years running. They just indicted Robert Mueller and put him in jail. I haven't caught up on any of that story yet, so I will say that the Russiagate has been going on for 2 years with no evidence still, which was one of the last casts I did. Was talking about that. There still has been no evidence of collusion or any kind of interference on the behalf of the Russian people or government in any way in our elections. But that's not what my cast is about today. My cast is about what's been going on with me in the past year. I got a new job. As some of you might know, I used to work for a auto parts delivery company in Glenwood Springs, Colorado. I quit my job working there. It was not something that was for me. And I took a couple months off, spent some time with my kids. My wife took over and got a job and gave me a chance to find something that I would like. Well, I got myself into the marijuana business or the cannabis industry. Again, actually, this is my second time being in the cannabis industry. The last time I was in the cannabis industry, it was, I believe, back in 2007, 2008. Back in 2007, 2008, it was medical marijuana was the only thing that was actually legal here in Colorado. Contrary to what was happening now, it was in fact the patients or everybody else who was buying the marijuana from the dispensaries that had to be licensed. Now it's actually the vendors themselves or the people who work for the vendors who also have to be licensed. So everybody has to be licensed except for the customer now who walks into the regular recreational place. No, they do still have to be licensed if they're picking up marijuana at any of the medical marijuana dispensaries. A lot of medical marijuana dispensaries are stepping away from that as a sole means of revenue. They're bringing in more. There are actually many of them that I know of that I've actually done a commercial for online. GNS has actually started, which is Green Natural Solutions in Glenwood Springs, has actually gone recreational in addition to their medical marijuana licensing. So there's that. So I spent a little time in the medical, the business that I worked for fell through, and after that I moved on to different things, and I've worked at several different jobs ever since then. Fast forward to now, so we're here. The last year I started working. I got my new license that I had to pay $75 for. Travel all the way to Grand Junction to go through an extensive background check and fingerprinting for. I went all the way to an hour and a half drive, 3 hours altogether, there and back. Got my license and immediately got a job working for one of the local farms, who at the end of that season was actually, finishing up doing their trimming season. They hired a lot of migrant trimmers, as we call them around here, I guess. There's just a lot of them here in Colorado who just travel from farm to farm, and which is a very great thing. I actually met a lot of very interesting people from a lot of different parts of Colorado. Colorado has been a boon for this new industry. It's been a great industry. It's been great to be part of the industry. Actually, to re-enter into it as a legitimized business has been an interesting thing, to say the least. So there's a lot of ups and downs to the industry I want to get to. I want to talk about. after I worked at one of the farms at the very end of the season, I got a job offer for not just a dispensary, but locally in this area, not just a dispensary or a cannabis cultivation and production manufacturing facility, but the one for this area. I got lucky enough to land a job with a place called Silver Peak Apothecary, Silver Peak Farms, and or Silver Peak Manufacturing, however, which way you want to call it, or whichever, I guess, area that you actually work for. It is a great place to work for. It was one of the best jobs I've had in years. It paid me fairly well. To be a full disclosure, I got paid $15.50 an hour right out of the gate. I still haven't. I was supposed to have gotten a review sometime soon. I learned how to do bubble hash, roll hash joints, do any number of cannabis-related industry things. It's a lot more like a regular job than you guys might think. A lot of you guys out there think it might sound like the glamorous thing. Strangely enough, other than the cannabis product that you're working with and that everybody's so happy to have such a good job in this new industry, there's honestly very little that's different about it as a job. When I went to work every day, it was a work-a-day job. You got bored. We were fortunate enough to be able to like listen to headphones and our own podcasts and listen to music if we wanted to on the Bluetooth radio around the shop and stuff like that, and sit and talk freely with one another as we worked. But, it was pretty work-a-day stuff. You sit there, and some days, my first few months there, I literally sat there and rolled hash joints, which was, 80% marijuana to 20% hash, hash joints. I rolled them for hours and hours and hundreds of them, hundreds and hundreds of joints. So it got to be pretty work-a-day stuff. It's real monotonous work. Then they moved me up to another part of the business, which was the bubble hash, and which is a much more interesting and intricate and involved aspect of the marijuana extrication. I'm not going to get too into that in this podcast because it's a very, very involved process, and unless you're already familiar with it, then a lot of this is going to be meaningless towards the actual cast. So not to cut you guys short on any information that might be fun or knowledge, and maybe I'll give a cast on this some other day too. So who knows? I learned a lot there. It was really great. It was a product I really love and stood behind. It was an interesting product to work with. I had never done anything like it even before, but having been a former cook for a lot of years, I can tell you it was kind of like reverse cooking, making bubble hash. And it's clean. It's a non-solvent extrication process. It's organic, and it was a product I was proud not only to partake in, but I was also very proud to be making and having learned, because it is a specialty thing that I've learned. That aside, I did that for several months. We've trained some folks in and out of that place. I've watched a lot of growth and retraction happen in the place. Recently, me and 5 of my fellow coworkers were let go. We were laid off of our jobs. Marijuana industry in Colorado is a booming industry. Our business is no different, and like all businesses, they have the ups and downs, the big buys and the big times when the market's like really moving and you got lots of product being moved around and being bought and stuff, and then you got times where it peters out or slows down, which is normal economic market stuff. So all of that aside, there's some interesting things about it. They paid above average for a lot of people here in Colorado to start. That's starting to also retract as they become more and more business-like. So the positive aspects of it are that the people that you meet are really excited about the industry that they're working in. They know that they're working with a product that sells itself, for one. They're working with a bunch of folks that, most of whom, have a different kind of attitude towards life and are a little bit more free-spirited. It was the place that I worked at recently at Silver Peak Manufacturing We had people from retired dentists to dreamers to, people who've worked in the industry before for several years, and then people who have not worked in the industry ever before, like me, or worked in a minor way like me. So it was really a great business. And I can say that my coworkers were second to none. I worked with a really great crew of people, and I always joke, and I'm going to continue to tell the joke, that I worked with the smartest group of people with short-term memory than you can really imagine. And they were everybody was really simply smart on their own level. Everybody had their own specialty in terms of their own personal knowledge and their own personal expertise in the industry. So that was all good. Downside of the industry, I'm going to cover. We got laid off, as I had mentioned, and 5 of us out of our 10-person crew got laid off. It was unfair for it to happen. The things leading up to it were that we became more business-like. It became more business-like. They started involving the investors. They hired a couple high-paid salespeople who it seemed as though sales, as soon as they hired these folks, did not increase, but in fact came to a grinding halt. And then when we got investors involved, it seemed to be doubly so. I will say that whatever value that these investors and salespeople were supposed to have added to our company did not translate. It didn't translate into anything good for those who were working there and actually creating the products. They did make sure to cover their butt and hire new people to get trained in before they had to give any reviews and possible raises, as a usual corporation or business does. So business as usual, and that's the problem with marijuana industry, at least partially in my view. I'll talk about a couple things like the taxation and things like that. In fact, I want to talk about the taxation last because there's a related article that I'm going to have to read part of to you. But I want to talk about the not so green aspect of the green industry, of the cannabis industry. And that is the ecological nightmare that is the packaging that comes with it. The multiple layers of packaging that we threw away. Just unbelievable amounts of plastic. Plastic to wrap the plastic that's going in plastic that's in the sticker industry. If you just, they are the ones laughing themselves all the way to the bank. The ones who are into the sticker and packaging industry are making out like bandits compared to everybody else because there's more than enough. And this is going to create an ecological nightmare, from their PAX pods that they have to all the little disposables, the disposable things that are metal and plastic recently that they had us test and see if we liked them, which I do not. I think they smoked great, but the fact that they're disposable and that there's just metal plastic thing that's going to go into the trash and not get recycled is a problem. There's a big problem. The lack of recycling, lack of green intelligence going on in the green industry is really, really is prevalent. And it was something that hit me in the face immediately when I started working there. I kept thinking, wow, look at all this packaging. I've got packaging, this wrapping packaging, and we're throwing all this fucking plastic away, and at the end of the day, all this stuff that I'm packaging, I've got packages and packages that go in packages. It all ends up in the waste at the end of the day. They don't even have green services like a recycling service that should be running around collecting all this stuff and having it recycled and repurposed. I did see a business that tried to start doing that here in Colorado. It looked like they tried to get up and going. I looked at their website, and then it looked as though whatever it was they were trying to do just petered out because of lack of funding and or interest on behalf of the industries themselves. So same old, industries get involved. The lack of sustainability, the lack of intuitiveness when it comes to the environment and things like that are not something that's on their plate or table. And that was obvious in our business. It's not something that people liked to talk openly about. I kept talking pretty openly about it, and it seemed to annoy some folks, to tell you the truth, but that's just a way of it. Also, one of the things is I learned as I joined the industry at Silver Peak, it being more of a what do you say a business, as I said before, because they made me sign an anti-union or a promise to not form a union contract agreement in the multiple layers of contracts that we had to sign. So much contracts, in fact, that I mentioned it to a couple of my coworkers who didn't even remember signing it because it was buried in so much paperwork. Stuck out like a sore thumb to somebody like me, but at the same time, clearly something that I'm not even sure is constitutional or legal for them to say that you can't even try to start a union. Neither here nor there. It was just a heads up. It was an indication to me of what the business was really, and that's a business. I said it before, I'll say it again. People in this industry, especially, it would be great if there were more of an initiative for people to start employee-owned businesses, especially in the cannabis industry. I think that's really, really the way to go. Otherwise, when it comes to cannabis, I'd like to see it decriminalized entirely for everybody to be able to grow and or use at their discretion. Period. End of story. I don't want any kind of regulation on it whatsoever, unless it's a cannabis product that's derived from the plant that you have to release onto the market. Then of course you need some kind of regulation and or oversight to make sure that you're not hurting and poisoning people. But at the end of the day, this plant should be exactly that. It's an herb. It's a plant. It's useful. It's not harmful. It's in fact a boon for us as a people. So let's decriminalize it across the board. Make sure that nobody pays the price of going to prison for its use and or distribution. Distribution is a bigger problem with some things, so if you need to confiscate and or destroy the product because they're distributing it unlawfully, then that's a whole different matter that we can address. And that's my final thought on at least that aspect of the legal part. When we're talking about the legal part, when it got legalized here in Colorado, we also have to mention taxes. Pardon me. So taxes were one of the things that motivated some of the more conservative elements here in Colorado to go ahead and give the nod to recreational marijuana. I've often questioned whether or not that was a reasonable thing to do, especially since marijuana hasn't caused any calculable damage. They're basically being punished. If you tax this industry and continuously tax it for your pet projects and stuff like that, you're basically punishing a successful industry for being successful, even though they haven't caused any demonstrable damage. So I question the rationality of using taxation and the concept of sin tax to fund pet projects and stuff like that. It's not a good way of funding things. The better way is to go after the larger moneyed people and to tax them in a fair tax rate and distribute that money in a sensible way, rather than try to punish a specific industry, especially one that's successful, and you're punishing it for no reason other than they're successful and you can sap some money out of that particular industry. Now, some people have posted recently an article, and I want to read part of this article to you. The article is from yourhealthinfo.com. Now, the article, misleading, from the very beginning, it says Colorado is using $3 million from marijuana tax to provide food, housing for the homeless. I'm going to read some of this article for you and go through why this is incorrect. Colorado using $3 million to provide food, housing, and homeless. The debate about legalization of marijuana has been prevalent in North America culture for 50 years. The decision by the state of Colorado in October 2014 to legalize marijuana for recreational use was seen as revolutionary by those on both sides of the divide. Now, first of all, the way they narrate that and paint that is ridiculous. The decision was not. They make it sound like the decision was some kind of state thing that was just the legislator. They were decided to legalize marijuana. No, this was an initiative. It was an initiative that was by the people to push this through. So let's not paint it to be something that it wasn't. Now, to continue, it says Colorado and marijuana. Since that decision was made nearly 4 years ago, the state of Colorado has been an increase year on year in tax revenue. It's seen an increase year on year in tax revenue gained from the cannabis sales. And that's true. How could it not be? They've sold incredible amounts of marijuana and derived incredible amounts of taxes from that. In most recent financial year ending in 2016, the state made nearly $70 million revenue gained through taxation. That was one of the key arguments for legalization weed, which I've mentioned before. Now that this argument has been clearly validated, many taxpayers have been wondering what state will do the additional money, what the state will do with the additional money. Well, that's a really good question, because here in this area, in Garfield County, our state has seemed to still continue to run into shortfalls, even though we sell massive amounts of marijuana, have a very strong marijuana industry. They still seem to be asking for further initiatives and further taxes to continue to fund school projects and things like that, or school shortfalls. It seems like all the money is getting eaten up in a bureaucracy, and it's not making it to the places that it was ever promised to be. That's my narration on that. I haven't seen any evidence that this is really making any kind of difference in our schools at all. And again, to try to pony up all of the money on the back of an industry is just it's not irrational, because the industry isn't stable. No industry is stable. There's going to be a boom and bust in this industry, like there was in Oregon with their overgrowing and over farming. There's no, it's not sustainable. So to continue in the article, though, it says, over the course of the next 3 years, a total of $3 million will be given to a series of groups across the city, all of which work tirelessly to provide hostels provide food for a homeless community. The money will be paid out over the next 3 years, with $1.5 million promised for the end of the current fiscal year, which ends in 2017. So they're basically doling this out to a bunch of organizations, and it's getting caught up in a bureaucracy of a bunch of people who are going to sap up a bunch of that money and dole out small amounts of it and make a marginal, if at all, difference in the communities, schools, or for the homeless for that matter. I'd like to point out, though, you continue reading this article. This is only in Aurora. This happens now. At the beginning of this article, it says at the beginning of the article, Colorado is using $3 million from marijuana tax to provide food and housing for the homeless. Well, you look farther in here and you find out that, it's not Colorado at all. There's no other counties doing it. There's no other cities doing it. There's nobody else doing this. They talk about the homeless problem. But there's nobody else doing any of this stuff except for Aurora. And they're not really doing anything except for creating more bureaucracies to funnel the money through. There's no evidence that there's anything beneficial going on here at all with that. So that's my take on that. That's my take on the whole marijuana conflation. It's a great industry, you guys. It's got a lot of benefits to it. It's turning into, unfortunately, a real business. And as we know, when the capitalist business model starts to take over anything, no matter how good it is, it's bound to become tainted. So I'm worried about the health of it. It looks like a boom and bust business for the state of Colorado. It certainly hasn't recently, even though we haven't had problems with sales in any way, it certainly hasn't translated into stable jobs for those of us in the industry. As I've heard from many in the industry, the sort of thing that's happened to me recently with my layoff is a pretty common occurrence. Except for usually they try to get you before you're eligible for any kind of unemployment or anything. I'm fortunate that I'm eligible for some unemployment, so I'm going to keep up the cast. We're going to keep up the good work, and I've got some additional casts coming, again, talking about going radio, and I'm back. It's good to see you folks. Truth, activism, bananas. We're in pursuit of the truth. We need that activism, and bananas are really good for the energy. Peace, my friends.